everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to Better Life discussion. During our weekly episodes, we explore this intersection of spirituality and psychology, and frankly, quite it's such an honor that we come to capture during our discussions timeless wisdom that are contained in both fields. I'm really excited to have you here with me today as Yuri Castro with me comes back to join in this insightful and profound reflection that Joanna de Angelis brings to us about the journey of the human spirit. How you doing, Yuri?
I'm very good. Thank you so much, Marcia, for having me back. I'm excited about today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Well, I want to start reminiscing on a moment quite a long time ago, Yuri. But as you know, Christopher Reeve, he, the actor, right? He gained worldwide fame when he played Superman in four films. He did that around late 70s to late 80s, so about 10 years in this. And interesting enough, his portrayal of that character was so iconic because in it he combined his portrayal, right? A sense of strength, his charm, and interesting enough, moral integrity. Unfortunately, about another 10 years later, less than 10 years, in 1995, he had a horse riding accident that left him, as most of us know, paralyzed from the neck down. And in this process of losing it all, losing his ability to act, losing his ability to work as he was so used to with his body, his strength, right? All of physicality that he had in the movies, he actually became a quite interesting but passionate advocate for anyone who had gone through spinal cord injury. And he did research, and he really was also an advocate for disability rights. At the time, he founded the Christopher Reeve Foundation. He raised millions of dollars for medical research. And that's interesting, this point here, but he pushed for advances in stem cell therapy, right? He he also worked. It's impossible to think about all he did. He directed films. He wrote books. He actually continued acting, and he became this powerful voice for hope and resilience. Yuri, a year before he died, in 2003, he died in 2004, I got to meet him. So Christopher Reeve presented on the stem cell, right, therapy and what he was doing with his foundation during a conference. And I got to hear, I was very close to him, such a powerful moment that I still bring that to my memory. And in addition to talk about the research that he was doing or he was help fund, he actually he delivered one of the many motivational speeches. And with that message, he inspired all of us with such a message of hope and perseverance. So think about it. He was wheelchair bound. He had lost his hair. He was very tall, very a very tall man and good looking, etc. But he no longer, his body was failing. He was at the very end of that path, and he physically speaking, visually speaking, he no longer embodied the invincible and ideal man. So that idealized version of Superman that he played so many times and made him worldwide famous, right? And yet he was there to me and to anyone in that audience. Um, he remained that symbol of strength. Even thinking about it, I get a little choked because it was such a powerful message. So, my question to you, can we maybe use our episode today to talk about this journey, in this case, the journey that Christopher Reeve did, but that we all do somehow, right? The journey into the depths of his soul, facing, in the case of Christopher Reeve, facing the echoes of the Superman archetype, but in the end, finding himself in the path, the real path toward inner wholeness. What are your thoughts?
Thank you for sharing that story of meeting him and for giving a little bit of a background on Christopher. And I think that your question is very pertinent because, especially for today's episode, when we're talking about the Superman archetype and this idea that this person who had portrayed the Superman or Clark Kent, the one who was morally perfect, physically stronger than anybody else out there. So physically strong, morally very advanced, intelligent, kind, all of those qualities, that the Superman brings, this archetype brings with this invincibility, especially the physical invincibility. And it is, for one reason or another, it is something that we can take, like learn a lesson from, I think, because even with the actor himself, who was the portrayal of the
Mhm.
Superman idea of this character who was almost quote unquote perfect in a way,
Yeah,
had the kryptonite and all, but he was basically perfect in a lot of different dictionaries out there. But this idea that this person who portrayed the Superman in the end was like suffer something that was not planned, something that perhaps he had the injury,
mhm.
became, like you said, paralyzed from the neck down, and therefore it's interesting to see how someone who was portraying something so invincible, so unbreakable, in the end shows how our bodies are very fragile, how all of
Yeah,
these things that we have and we're using right now, which is the material world, everything is ephemeral,
yeah,
everything will pass, will come to pass, how all of that is very fragile, very ephemeral. So to answer your question, I think this idea that I can only wonder what went on in his mind when he was
mhm.
faced with a challenge that would have quote unquote broken many
Yes,
people, in morally speaking or emotionally speaking. But in the end, he used that. And that's the part I really admire. He used that platform. He used his own image. He used everything that at his disposal, like you said, to advance research, to advance stem cell research and spinal cord injury and all of those things. So he definitely made good use of this idea of I portrayed somebody unbreakable before, but now here I am, quote unquote, broken physically, but mentally and morally still so strong and still making a difference.
yeah, yeah. And I wanted to maybe come back to the idea, right? This myth of the Superman, which is this archetype of perfection, morally, physically, etc., etc. And somehow, I think we have fallen into it, right, Yuri? Today, more than
Yes.
ever, we are all trying to be super whatever, but it's so difficult because we're not there, right? We're not there. We cannot just say, let me take a pill and become what I'm not, or take away the uniform, which, by the way, it's very interesting. Let's just pause here. It's very interesting to think about it. All all the if you think, I love another hero, Batman, right? But Batman is the normal man, the physical man, and to become Batman, he puts the cape, right? He actually masks himself. In the case of Superman as a myth, he does the opposite. To be Superman, he actually took away his clothes as a normal person, his glass, right? And he unveiled. So the Superman in that sense, and this is film, right? It's really interesting because it's inside. But anyways, what I'm thinking is for all of us, this myth of oh, I want to be powerful. I want to be seen. I want to be, have all the glitter, the lights, etc., etc. It's really impossible. And it was a Nietzsche that maybe brought that up, right? Many decades. This is pre-Hitler and the Holocaust and all the ravages of World War II. But he brought that idea of a Superman to counter at the time when he wrote the book. Um, what he felt was a very ah apathetic society, right? The society at the time that it was killing, quote unquote, killing all of us. We were zombies already instead of being Superman, right? Man, or super being. So I'm just thinking, isn't it interesting? Because I feel we're going through the same thing again. We're looking for external, the surgical or a portrayal that it doesn't really belong to us. We're bringing an idealized version of ourselves instead of being ourselves, right?
Absolutely, and I think you touched on an important topic there when you mentioned the idea of the Superman being used in a wrong way,
Yeah,
and we don't have. I mean, we don't have to go into too specific history here, but even the ideas is not the first time this happened. If we think about the Crusades,
yeah,
what was that if not killing someone else because in the name of Jesus? Like, when would Jesus want that? When was that ever the message? It's quite the opposite. So it's very unfortunate that because of our fragile and still developing stage, as spirits, we
mhm,
are or developing states, sorry, as spirits, we're still misusing some of these ideas to do evil
yeah,
deeds. And that's something that was done with, like I said, with Jesus's message and with so other people's messages. And also, you mentioned more recently with this notion of Hitler incorporating the idea of this being that was superior, because that's what
yeah,
Superman is at the end, right? He
yeah,
is superior than everybody else from a beauty standpoint, physical standpoint, moral, etc., etc. And this notion of utilizing this message to create so much pain and so much suffering, and that's something that is very sad, because obviously we
mhm,
can't be Superman. We're not we're
yeah,
not there. And I think Joanna does touch on a point where the journey to become better is we sometimes shy away from that in this search to become Superman, or how you said it nowadays, with all the advancements in technology, where we're trying to extend our lives, which is okay,
yeah.
lifespan, but also try to be perfect and never age and never have flaws and never show our true selves to the world.
This awesome. Very, very interesting. And I was just listening to a podcast this past few days on exactly aging and how there is actually, no matter how many books are there, very few books are talking about um, the loss of identity, because of our identities are so intertwined with who we are as a role, right?
Yes,
Instead of being the development of identity that it talks about the soul instead. So how do we do when we no longer work? We're retired, and who are we? Well, we don't know. Or when we are parents and our children move on, but who am I if I'm not a mother in that case, so on and so forth. So very interesting reference to aging, aging and using that time well, right? To look and search for our own identity. So I want to maybe ask Yuri, right? What if the pursuit of this being a super being, right? Becoming that super being is in truth a disguised rejection of the self.
It could be, and a self with lower s, not capital S, lowercase s, because it is in a sense a way for us, I think, to try to idealize Superman or try to impersonate Superman or become Superman or Superwomen. What happens is we're trying to perhaps shy away from the fragilities that we have, which we try to shy away or stay away, not even think about all the shadow that we still carry, because the Superman
Yeah,
archetype in that there's basically no shadow. So in this idea that we're trying to become something way superior than what we are right now, but we fail to see that we still have a lot to grow. And one thing that Joanna talks about in her book,
mhm,
and that really caught my attention, was
yeah,
this process, or this frustrated attempt, she calls,
yeah,
to idealize oneself, or for the person to idealize themselves as Superman or Superwoman, actually robs us of the process of learning, in a way, robs us not necessarily of the process, because we will learn, but robs us of this idea that we are learning, we are experiencing, we have the potential to become Christs
yeah,
eventually, in
yeah,
billions of years perhaps of evolution of our own spirits. But we have that potential in us, and when we're trying to become something we're not, something that is infallible, unbreakable, and all those things, that becomes a problem, because what happens is we idealize something that doesn't go through the process of suffering to death, anguish, all those things that
yeah.
Superman doesn't have to go through, and then we do. So what happens when we are faced with the reality that we are not Superman or Superwomen? What do you think?
Oh, I love it. And the image that came to my mind, Yuri, is when as kids we become in contact with the idea of transformation, right? From the cocoon and
Yeah.
chrysalis into a butterfly. And there have been many accounts of kids that feel so uh, distraught by the fact that the butterfly has to
Yes.
suffer, right?
I was gonna say yes.
Yes, and then they cut it, the cocoon, and by cutting the what looks to us a process of suffering, they're also cutting the ability for the butterfly to fly away, right? So I think it's very interesting um, why, and we talked a lot about suffering before, but why is it so hard for us to understand that going through the pains sometimes is what's going to help us gain our wings, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Yet we strive for perfection, right? We strive for power. As we start to get better, we like, oh, let's also, there's this ambition, this desire to do more, which is good, right? This is not bad, to want to grow, want to attempt, want to challenge ourselves, but becoming what we want to be does not mean that we can escape pain, self doubt, and even death, right?
Oh yes. And the thing is, we are still in a plane, in a very material plane of existence. We're still very much ruled by matter, unfortunately, but it's changing, obviously, gradually. That's the
Yeah,
key word here, gradually. That's changing both in our planet and in ourselves as a society and as human beings. But the idea is we cannot escape suffering. I think
yeah,
we talked about in different episodes here in this podcast about pain and suffering and origins of suffering, and Joanna is very clear, and all the other spirits authors are very clear on this idea that the suffering, it's like the chisel that
Yes.
helps sculpt something that is already there, like the,
I
the
love that image.
Michelangelo idea, right? That's something
Yeah.
that is already there. You're just removing the unnecessary parts, but that removal is something that hurts. Even if
Yeah.
we were to think that the marble has feelings, how would it feel having a chisel
Yeah.
like go and work at him? It would probably feel pain if we could
Ye-
imagine that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the end, it sort of emerges as this beautiful piece, and it understands that the chisel had a meaning, had a process. And when we are idealizing something that is unbreakable, something that bullets cannot penetrate, something that is unkillable, and has all these powers of flight and this and that, we miss a very big step, or very, very big, important steps in our evolution to
Yeah.
become spirits that will rise above matter as
Yeah.
spirits.
Yeah. I think I'd like to remind you and I, but also it's something that Jung himself reminded us, that the shadow that we refuse to face, right? This is really interesting. The shadow we refuse to face will shape our lives from the dark. So
Wow, yeah.
perhaps, right? The Superman is just that. It's an archetypal mirage, an illusion, and built from the parts of ourselves that we actually don't want to feel, because it will be facing our frailties, our, all the material aspects of ourselves that we have to face, but we don't want to. And that may include fear, longing, or even grieving. I've been reminded lately a lot about aging and the loss of mobility, loss of independence, loss of yourself. And in this process, we grieve, right? How come I'm no longer who I thought I was? But anyways, I want to maybe pivot, if you're okay with it, to talk about the idea that we must, like Christopher Reeve, right? We must go down before we can go up. And again, that referencing back to Jung in his, psychology, the sense of individuation or integration or plenitude. We can use many different words, right? The process of becoming whole begins not by escaping suffering, but by moving through it. So the thought to me, is that when we climb, right, to higher ground, to the summit of a mountain, perhaps, and that implies many different things, right? We have a broader vision, but it implies that it takes effort to climb, but it also means that there is a valley that we may descend into it. And Jung, in his allegories, he talks about, for us to be able to really see, we need to go into the depth of our unconscious, our valley, right? What are maybe the stories that we carry? What is our shadow? And when we do this, when we have the courage to confront all the things that we absolutely don't want to, which means we're going to find all of our weaknesses, all of the worst part of ourselves, we gain something amazing, which is the wisdom, right? And the self, now with a capital S, we get to know who we truly are, our spiritual self, and no longer able to, see the mask for who we are, because that
Mm-hmm.
is not. So it's this, I love it, this mysterious center of our being, that it is foreign, but is at the core of who we are. What are your thoughts? Can we talk a little bit about this idea of going down to go up again?
Of course, yeah, and I mean, Jung was very big on this idea of
Mm,
working on the whole being, right, the whole
yeah,
individual, and it's what he often calls like deep psychotherapy and things like that, because because of that, with this idea that, and even Joanna mentions this about this notion of the deep psychotherapy or the deep therapy being able
mm,
to break through the shell that the shadow often hides. And so
yeah,
this idea of these corners that are of our, let's call it the corners of our being, who are still very much not under light, and then we come with a flashlight and we're illuminating those parts, so we understand that, one, they are there. It's because we're running from them or because we're trying to hide them does not mean they're going to go away. They are there. They are part of us. So it's important and pivotal in our own development that we look for them. We work, we help, like he always talking about integrating, like integrating that part and understanding that it is parts. It is a step in our evolution. It is a step in our development, psychological, spiritual, that we will work on these things that we still have that need to be worked on. That these things, that doesn't matter how much we try to avoid or hide or run away from, they're there, and they're going to be there unless we truly embrace them and we work on them. And this is something already talked in different episodes of this podcast as well. But
uh-huh.
again, I think that it's very important that we help ourselves by not trying to avoid the suffering, or at least not understanding the meaning of suffering, because the only thing that we do in trying to run away from suffering is create more suffering, because there's no life. We don't have the plenitude just yet. We're still going to suffer, and we must understand that and learn from that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the whole idea that I want to be something that I'm not. I don't want to suffer in the process of becoming what I want, but I'm not. Like
Yes.
there's lots of little paradoxes in this whole process. And I believe in one of her books, Joanna also talks about the misconceived idea that I'm going to go through my own sacrifice, right? I'm going to inflict pain on myself because I'm not going to avoid pain, but I'm going to inflict pain so that in this religious zealousness to be what I'm not, and that doesn't work either. It's almost as if we need to be able to be patient to embrace organically, naturally, all the suffering or the pain that will come our way when they come our way, right? Because
Yeah.
the journey of the hero, perhaps not of the Superman, but of the hero, is really the journey of someone who confronts the giant, the unknown, the forest, right? I'm using terms in some of the mythology of the hero,
Yes.
but going to what is scares you to death, but having the courage to do it. And it's the act of confronting what is maybe bigger than you, much stronger than you, much more powerful. But in the act of confronting that, we really become the hero, right?
Oh yeah, because there's a much bravery in confronting oneself and conquering those, the dark corners that we talked about. And I think
Yeah,
there's much bravery in that. And you mentioned before that I forgot to talk about this too, but the valley, the idea of going down and like in the valleys and all of those things. And Joanna also talking about how, when when we are down in the valley, we have limited view, or we're limited
yeah,
vision, perhaps, right?
yeah,
But as we climb up, and the climb up is often hard. So as we climb up and we go up, we can see more of what's out there. We have a much better view of all the beauty of everything. And one thing that is very interesting that happens is as we climb up, we realize and I'm going to put it in quotation marks, how small we actually are,
Yeah.
and how there's so much out there, and then we become inspired, I think, and triumphant to just do better, and just to see how everything is sort of connected. And and even with the nature, you mentioned the cocoon, right?
Yes.
Nature is perfect, it's God's creation, so of course that in everything there is a message for us to learn, if we are looking to learn from everything around us. And that is a big message, because if we try to pry away, I mean, the caterpillar from its cocoon, or if we try
Yeah.
to do that to ourselves, or do that to someone else as well, let me change that person, let me
Right.
open their cocoon so they can already escape their suffering and emerge a butterfly, what we're going to be doing is causing more pain. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's in that case, right? I really like what you said. When we try to pry away the suffering in the loved ones, for example, right? When we see
Oh yeah.
our kids growing, and we're like, oh no, 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 no. Let me let me insulate from any type of
Of danger, of distress, anything, yeah.
yeah, and we're somehow as parents hurting the chances of the child to grow. But let's pivot one last time. I think we have a little bit more time today. Can we talk perhaps about the path of integration when we discuss perhaps and reference an amazing, one of the best texts found in the Gospel according to Spiritism by Allan Kardec. It's chapter 17, right? Being perfect, which is so, there's such a symmetry to what we're discussing today. But then he talks about the characters or characteristics of a good person, a good man. And I was just wondering, can we maybe talk about it? What did he say, and why is it such an important text for everyone to reference if you have time? Because it really brings us so many moments of reflection, right, about our day-to-day life. It's very in the flesh, if you will. It's in
Yes,
our waking up and having breakfast, whatever, the mundane things that we confront, but how to do that and be a good person, right?
absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up, because of course there's so much wisdom in the Gospel according to Spiritism by Allan Kardec. And in the chapter, like you said, chapter 17, this idea of the good man, or be perfect, he's talking about, it's almost a guideline. I like to think of Marcia as like a guideline for us
Uh-huh.
to sort of like follow as much as we can, but really do our best to follow, because a lot of that we can already follow if we just decide not to, not to be lazy, or not to be afraid of other people's reactions and all of that. So he's talking about, this idea of the good man, or no, he uses obviously the word man to refer to the human being,
Yeah.
uh, somebody that is, observes the law of love, the law of charity, justice, all those things. So working on humility, working on charity, working on not harming other people or doing harm to others, being good, and just observing the laws, of God, and putting the faith in God, using what we have, like materially speaking, the wealth and intelligence and anything we have at our disposal here to
Yeah.
help others. So humility, charity, justice, all those things. And the main message, I think, too, that he talks about in this one is, and I mean, this is at least a message that when we study, we take from that, is this is not necessarily about like religious labels or appearances or things like that. It's about the actions and the intentions behind those actions. So the
I
intention of
love it.
truly
Yeah.
being, humble, good, being forgiving, forgiving others, forgiving yourselves, being kind, and all those things. That's why I say it's like a guideline, almost like a checklist that we can try to follow. And this way we're going to be constructing our own good self. Let's call it good self instead of good man.
Yeah, and I love it as this checklist, as you put it, right? Have you done this? Have you thought about blah blah? How do you see yourself as we relate to this good person, right? This idealized person, but it's not idealized because we have an external factor in, right? We are born in a different planet that gives us the invisibility. It's idealized, but it's possible,
It
right?
is.
It
It
is
is possible.
so, yeah, it's what we can do. But one of the things that I love about it, this is my maybe perverse side, right? But in the text, the good man, he does this, he does that, he does that, and he knows all the troubles and issues with life, all the painful moments, all the disappointments. He knows that those are, if you will, tests for us to really see that we are progressing in this development of who we are into being something better. And but I love it that in the text it includes, and he accepts, right? The good man
Uh-huh.
accepts those tests without complaint. And I'm like, oh, Yuri, we are such a society of complaint, right? That yeah, I can do, but I'm going to complain about it. You gotta be ready to listen to my
Yes.
complaints, right?
That's how I know I'm not a good man, as Kardec put it. Because I do, because we do complain. We do complain a lot. Who here? I mean,
Yeah,
embraces suffering, all types of suffering as they come, and just as tests. And
yeah,
this is, of course, what we're trying to achieve. And the more we talk about it, the more we study, the more we try to put in practice,
yeah,
understanding that there will be a lot of mistakes along the way. There will be a lot
yeah,
of moments of weaknesses in which we just rebel. We
yeah,
revolt, but it's how do we actually bounce back? How do we actually try to improve? And I think that's when Kardec is talking about that sort of acceptance, and in a good way, acceptance of the trials without
mhm,
complaint. This
yeah,
is something we've seen, like Saint Augustine and Paul, and like Mother
yeah,
Teresa, and like all those spirits, the Chico Xavier, right? All those
yeah,
spirits that we know, Divaldo, that they come and they already went through a lot of
yeah,
complaining in previous existences, certainly.
yeah,
But the fact is, we can get there. And in remembering too that the complaining is not just speaking out loud. It could be
mhm,
just in here as well. If we're complaining, if we're revolting just in here, it also has an effect. And I'm pointing to my head, meaning the thoughts.
yes, yes, it's a very good point. And one of the things that if you start to wrap it up where we're talking here, it is all about the potentiality that we all have, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and this is for me, and maybe I can have the audacity to say for you as well, and for all of us who are in this life today. It is the question that we are human beings and we are imperfect beings, right?
Yes.
And the journey isn't toward becoming that idealized, perfect, the Superman, right? That's not. The journey is about how can I integrate? How can I look at myself? How can I find all the things that I'm not doing yet? I know the checklist is there, but I'm still complaining, or the checklist there and I failed to do one or two or three of the items. Because we do, right? But it is this journey that we look at ourselves, and I'm looking to my right and left as in saying, yeah, I still am not there, but I am in a journey toward integrating the parts of me that can be there, and the parts of me that cannot be there yet. So in doing that, I can reconcile of, if I may say so, the many selves that we have within, and I'm not talking about a multiple personality
Yeah.
disorder here, right? But the many selves, the many attributes that is in different levels of maturity, and we can reconcile them because we are promoting. I love the visual that you gave, like maybe the detectives that go into the house looking for clues, and it's always in the dark, and they have the little tiny
Yes.
beam in their flashlight, and it's like, I'm looking, and I have to say to you, every time I see a movie or detective story, I say, turn on the light, but they don't. They go into with a flashlight looking for clues that are hidden, and that's really us,
That's the
right?
process, yeah. That's the
Yeah,
process we go through because, and I mean, when before you even said like, oh, I want them to turn on the light, I was already thinking because
yeah,
even as Jesus says, too much light can blind, and this
yes,
idea that we must, I mean, we must, and we only have the flashlight, meaning a little what's it called, a little part of light that's just
yeah,
illuminating a specific point,
point, right? Yeah,
a specific thing. We cannot just flip the switch and turn everything on and see all the corners we've been, like the shadow and all of that that's been in those corners, because that would overwhelm us. And
yeah,
that's something that Joanna talks about very wisely in her books, about this idea of not removing all these instruments that the ego has been maintaining, using to maintain itself. This
yeah,
idea that the integration with the self must occur gradually
yeah,
and naturally. We
yeah.
can't we under, we must understand it is a process. We go one corner at a time with the flashlight. We can't just try to flip the switch.
Yeah. So maybe, Yuri, the true hero is not the Superman, right? The true hero, maybe it's all of us who has the courage to choose to feel, right?
Yes,
And to choose to fall, but also to choose to rise. To all of us dare, who dares to walk the inner path, right, and not escape it, to be in the world, but to use this experience that we're living through to transform ourselves within it without losing who we truly are, right?
absolutely. Having the courage to go through that, or that what was that? That was that sentence. Christ is the inner man achieved, or inner being achieved through the path of self knowledge,
Yes,
something
yeah,
like that. But the idea is there, the
yeah,
idea of this individuation, of this, full integration with the self, and we have Christ as, our, or as an archetype, but also
yeah,
as something that is our end goal. It's where we're going to get. It's a spirit of first order, first class, if we look in the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec. So it is something that we will eventually get there when we go through this full process of self-knowledge and working on ourselves and doing all those things that Kardec mentioned in the checklist for the good men
yeah,
naturally. When we are able to do all of that without an effort anymore, being humble, being
yeah.
kind, being forgiving, then we'll get there.
And you don't need to be a psychologist. You don't need to have a psychologist, psychotherapist. You don't need to be religious. You don't need to be a
Nope.
spiritist. All of us will naturally get to be that good man, right?
Yeah,
Um,
the law of progress is unstoppable, and it doesn't matter. And we're talking about moral progress, not religious progress, moral
mhm,
progress. So
yeah,
it's not circumscribed to a specific religious identity or a specific sex or gender or race, quote unquote race, whatever it is. It is happening. It's going to continue to happen. It's a part of us to see how fast or how slow we will be going in this journey.
yeah. Oh, this is so good. Yuri, it's time to say goodbye. Our conversation is so good. I really appreciate. And just for all of us here, I just wanted to just to conclude, to wrap it up, right? We explored several topics, right, including the myth of the Superman and how it opposes the idea contained in spiritual evolution, in spiritism, but the idea that our journey as immortal spirits will achieve wholeness at some point. You don't need to be what you're not, right? And
Yes.
uh, and I think the dream of the Superman, Yuri, which is highlighted with that archetype of the Superman, leads us to this curious discussion around, as we mentioned, the descent and ascent and the path of integration. And I just love it. It's such a good way to reflect about who and what is the true hero in us. Is it Superman or is it just us? All of us who choose to feel, to fall, as I mentioned, to rise, to walk that path of individuation. So just before I say goodbye, I want to say this is truly an invitation for all of us to not escape the world, right? Let's not go into craziness pretending that we are not living a material experience, an experience that's all very individual. Your personality, your likes, your dislikes, your failures, your complaints, right? But we're here to transform ourselves within this context. But as I said, this is time to say goodbye. And I do hope this conversation has inspired you as much as it has inspired me. And so that we can reflect on our own journey, which is very personal, very individual. And until next time, I just want to say let us all stay good, stay curious, stay compassionate, patient, and strive to have the courage to go into our deeper truths within. For those of you who have not seen other episodes, in other words, that this is the first time that you're listening to this program, please take a note that the psychology and spirituality talks are weekly and are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. We do hope that you enjoyed our talk today. And I want to thank you, Yuri, and all of our sponsors, and they are Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. We'll be back next week with another episode. So thank you and stay tuned. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you. See you next time.